Everyone, this is update for April 12, 2023, day 413 of the war, end of the date update. So this is also catch-up update for April 11. I'm going to discuss strategic problems or updates, and then we're going to switch to the front line. For those who sort of just here for the front line, I'll give you a heads up, there's not much of a change. It's kind of like a quiet moment before the storm. When the storm comes, nobody really knows. May take, based on what Ukrainian political top is saying, may take another month, 2 or even 3 till summer. So, but the Russian side is actively preparing and attempting to sort of let's say survive the storm, let's put it this way. But I'll discuss a little bit more more in depth once we get to the walk through the battlefield. First, I want to go back to this whole scandal that's continuing to develop about this leaked documents. Again, what I said before, all of those documents, there's nothing extraordinary about them. Anyone who does any analytic work would sort of have the same conclusions, would know the same things from just open sources without any special secret, let's say, access to all of the secret information. Just want to reiterate a couple more things in terms of, you know, I didn't mention about the spying, you know, US spying on South Korea, Ukraine, and so on. In the world of this intelligence agencies, they always spy on everybody. So, you know, U.S. intelligence agencies spying literally on everyone. You know, UK, Canada, Mexico, Germany, France, everybody. So it's a nature of the beast. That's by design. They designed to spy on everyone they can. And you know, obviously, and this is not just US phenomenon. This is the same if we take, you know, French intelligence, Russian intelligence, whatever, Chinese, Japanese intelligence, they do the same things. This is sort of nature of the beast, and everybody knows who understands how the system works. Everybody understands that that's sort of, there's nothing unnatural or surprising about it. And even I would say even more that they, within each agency, they, like everybody spies on everybody else, right? So this is not just, you know, we're spying on, you know, external, I would say, actors outside of the country. Like everybody spies against each other within the organization itself. So it's, I would say, kind of spiders. That's just how the best to describe this organizations. They're all the same everywhere, so they're not really different. And even more further, if you really pay attention, there is not just one intelligence agency. Usually, in most advanced countries, there are a couple of them, and the reason for that is because they spy on each other organizationally. So they exist to kind of create competition, and then to kind of to spy on each other, and so nobody's relaxed. Let's put it this way, and so. There's nothing sort of new, nothing surprising here. What is really, I would say surprising or negative is extremely poor, weak, and I would say unprofessional response from the U.S. Government to all of this. You know, what it does, it actually shows the problem. In terms of actually being able to properly respond, that's more damage coming from that than actually release of these documents by themselves. And that's where the biggest damage is coming from. Who might be sort of doing this in terms of you know, all of this. My bet, it's China. because I would say the way it's done, it doesn't look like it's Russia. Russia is too weak to do this kind of stuff. If you take into account everything else what's going on the world scene, this kind of like very nicely fits in terms of basically it's kind of like a hidden attack by China against the West, and obviously US because it's a leader of the West, because it's a prime target for, there should be no question about that for anyone, that's it's a sort of top target for Russia and for China. Well, obviously Iran, I'm not even sort of discussing. That's goes without saying. Let's put it this way. So hopefully this helps to understand a little bit this whole situation in terms of all of these leaked documents of where Ukraine is going to attack. As I discussed, there's not many options for Ukraine where to attack. Most likely option is the Zaporizhya front line. It's very obvious for the Russian side as well. They maybe not the brightest people, but it's so obvious that you really need to be very not bright to not understand that. Let's put it this way. And Russian military top is not that sort of not bright. Then let's switch. Actually, let's kind of keep going through all of this. So related to all of this, and why I'm saying this coming from China is that let's look. The Chinese president stayed in Guangdong province, Chinese province, where he was meeting with French president. He stayed there. He was inspecting southern, I would say, military command, and where he was giving essentially a speech to prepare for real war, accelerate, advanced preparation, and so on. Right, so this is not even first speech from him coming, calling for prepare sort of more hardcore for the war, giving this urges to Chinese military. Right, so I think a couple months ago he also was saying that as well. So you can see there is very clear, I'll say, encouragement or support or leadership coming from from Chinese president to Chinese military, to basically telling them effectively, be prepared, we're attacking soon, let's put it this way. So, and this attacks doesn't happen. This is not just military attack. Usually before you attack military wise, you attack diplomatically, you attack on all other fronts. First economic, that's much more important, and diplomatic, and so on. And as you can mention before, China has been actively attacking and had huge wins on diplomatic front, and this is in diplomacy and politics is concentrated economy. And so they won basically Persian Gulf, all of these countries, including Iran, Syria right now. There is essentially China arranged peace where they forced all of these countries to have a peace and offered basically protection to the Persian oil-producing Persian Gulf countries, and also economic opportunity. And so all of these countries happily switched to China, giving that they get most of what they need from China. There's not much they're getting from US, because US is really not these days not producing much of the sort of consumer goods or anything that's sort of useful. There's some part of it is coming from Europe, and most of it is from China. So there is no even strong economic ties or incentives between essentially between the most of the world and let's say US. There are more stronger ties between Europe and the rest of the world, because Europe still produces some consumer physical goods that are in demand in the world, and so there is sort of difference in the situation, and that's why we're seeing this split between Europe and effectively, US, UK, and essentially Australia and Canada and so on, because Germany, France, they still produce all of these goods that are in demand, and that's how their economic livelihood depends on it. And so naturally, economically, they don't want to destroy those ties, because it means economic suicidal for these countries. And so that's why you see this, support for China. We need to maintain relationship with China and so on, because China is one of the biggest buyers of the goods from, let's call it, continental Europe. There are also rumors that China is even more successful, that they are basically rebuilding Libya, which is here, and so basically that they arranging sort of peace there and single government. It's not sort of formally announced or complete, but they made huge strides there. They have also some wins in Tunisia, so this is neighbor of Libya. So basically they are essentially rebuilding all of this Near East and North Africa, and their sort of message, how they come, okay, we're coming as a source of peace and economic development and prosperity. At least that's how it's sold, right? This is that we are gonna, West destroyed this North Africa and Middle East, and now we're coming and we trying to rebuild it and glue it together. And that's a very powerful message that not only economically that they are tying them up, but also sort of spiritual message, ideological message. And that's, I would say, a huge problem for the West in this respect, because effectively they're losing very important region, even though technically it was sort of I would say, destroyed. There is obviously a lot of energy there, and we'll learn fairly soon that without crude oil in particular, there won't be any sort of modern economy, and the choice will be to return to the Middle Ages for the West. Then let's actually switch a little bit to more sort of Chinese-related events, but sort of more other parts of the world. So German Minister of Foreign Affairs is also visiting China starting April 13, and it's more like of a tour of the important countries there, which include South Korea and Japan. Then also Brazil president arrived to China, and there is a very, I'd say, high level, very luxurious reception, similar to the French president, so which also indicates that this is also a win for China. Now it's in Latin America, and again, if we look at Latin America situation, there is a lot of countries who are sort of not aligned with the West, and if I would single out the only sort of true allies of, let's say, US there is really Colombia and maybe Chile, and that's pretty much it. The US has terrible relationship with Mexico right now, always had, or not always, but fairly bad relationship with Argentina, Brazil. So all of their major countries there, and they're definitely not aligned with the US, and even sort of small, I would say less important countries in Central America, they literally become purchased by China. So one example is saying Nicaragua, and then the other one is, if I believe, San Salvador or El Salvador, I don't remember which, because the capital is sort of similar. But anyways, essentially China has undermined even sort of U.S. dominance in Latin America, which is it used to dominate since end of the 19th century. So as you can see, there's attack from all directions, from all angles. I'm not even talking about Africa, where there's obviously Russia is very active there, and pushing out mostly France out of its presence there. So, and obviously China is there as well. So as you can see, there's, the first sort of step before the military conflict, you want to win diplomatically, economically, sort of like, if not they're not allies, but they sort of quietly support you, right? Or they will not be against you. So, so this is what China has been doing, and they are pretty successful, I would say, in doing so. As a balance or sort of deterrent, U.S. is doing this military exercises. So one is happening with India on border with China, where there is a B-1 bomber, B-1 bomber from the U.S. participates, which capable of carrying nuclear bombs. Or so this is very clear signal to China. Then there is also exercise in Philippines with the U.S. sort of troops and soldiers and so on, and it's pretty large. I think it's like close to 20,000 soldiers there participating, and they happening simultaneously. So as you can see, there is very clear sort of signal to China from the U.S. About the basically trying to deter China essentially. If we look here in this Southeast Asia, like who are sort of potential allies of the U.S. or West, is essentially Thailand and Philippines. The rest is essentially quiet allies of China, or they're going to be neutral. And obviously Japan and South Korea is another one, but like if you look just in this southeastern region, and effectively Myanmar is to extent controlled by China, so effectively they can neutralize Thailand because there are some bases in near Bangkok, and effectively China can really easily get sort of there and neutralize Thailand. Obviously Philippines is going to be much harder, and as I said before, this is going to be very likely sort of main battlefield after Taiwan falls, essentially. So, and just for those who are not terribly familiar, just how close everything is. So essentially the closest Japanese island is about like 80 kilometers from Taiwan, which is here, and the closest Filipino island is about less than, let's say, 100 kilometers to Taiwan as well. So if there is something, there is high chance that all of this is going to get involved and somehow got involved in the conflict. So it's definitely the tensions are as high as it gets, and sort of how it's going to get released, we'll see. Also want to go back to a little bit about the China as well. So the head of European diplomacy, Josep Borrell, has essentially delayed his trip to China. He was citing some health issues and so on. But I think what's really happening, and China is sending clear sort of signal: we don't want any of this European Union bureaucrats because they're extremely aligned with just generally representing West, with UK, with the US. So they are sort of persona non grata there effectively, and that's what happened with Ursula von der Leyen. If you remember, I mentioned that she got very cold reception in China, in contrast to the French president. So what China is trying to do, they want to, how say, one-on-one relationship with each European country. And in that way, they're trying to sort of separate and sort of kind of like separate Europe effectively, or continental Europe, let's put this way, from, let's say, English-speaking part of the West. And as we can see, this is they are somewhat successful with France, where France has clearly reiterated its position that they really want to maintain relationship with China. They want to be part of, get involved in the Taiwan conflict, and so on. Then also there is also words of support for that from Spain. And there is also admission within European Union that there are more countries who share the views of France, but they sort of not daring to speak up yet. Most of it is obviously Southern and Central Europe. Eastern Europe definitely much more aligned with the West and with English-speaking countries in the West, just because they have experienced communism and Soviet Union invasion, so really understand what they up to and what's really going to happen. And they don't believe this. They don't buy this rhetoric that's coming about from China and from Russia about peace and prosperity for the world. They understand what's really behind those phrases. Then let's actually switch a little bit to, I guess, to Russia. In terms of Russian energy exports, the situation is getting better for Russia. They just sold crude oil for $61.55. The prices in, let's say, January, February were about, on average, they were selling euros $47, $49, somewhere in that range. So as you can see, prices really jumped quite a bit, and Russian budget was, say, organized or planned based on crude oil price of $70 per barrel. So they're getting very close. So the hole in the Russian budget will become, state budget will become much smaller. It's still gonna remain just because you see the 60 to 70, there's still $10, but also because of the natural gas exports, which are essentially dead. But actually Russia is not sort of sitting idle, and they also realize that selling that natural gas to China is the worst sort of scenario economically for Russia. So what they really doing, they trying to build all of these LNG facilities and build a fleet of LNG ships, carrying ships, to sell it to the world on a spot market, similar to crude oil, basically, right? So, it will take a while before they develop those capabilities. But essentially, the strategic move for Russia is actually become large LNG exporter to the world, and obviously that really means that the prices on the spot market for LNG tend to be pretty high. So this is high margin business. So they're trying to go back to sort of high margin export. Europe has died, but they're not losing hope. They're hopeful to be able to sell on the world LNG market at high margins, and that does not require building extremely expensive pipeline to China, because most of it is on Russia to finance it and so on. And the margin, as I said, there on Chinese market are basically so small that it's almost uneconomical to sell to China. Then in terms of just another tidbit of information of how it is going internally, economically inside of Russia, the good indicator is real estate market, and I have data for Moscow, which is essentially the heart and brain of Russia. Russia is generally, it's a huge country, but really everything is super concentrated in Moscow. Essentially, everything is economically is in Moscow. It's you can almost say Russia equals to Moscow. Because all of the financial flows, they all go from everywhere in Russia. They all go, they centralized in Moscow. So all basically, companies, their headquarters are almost exclusively in Moscow. So all of the money that's earned elsewhere in Russia, that's all concentrated in Moscow. So Moscow, in a way, some kind of like a spider that sucks like all of this cash from the rest of Russia, and that's why standard of living in Moscow is way above average Russian one. It's like almost two worlds, two countries, two separate countries, and so this situation in real estate market in Moscow really kind of quite telling. So what happens there is a huge overhang of inventory, unsold inventory of 11.8 million square meters of basically apartments, because that's where people live for the most part in former Soviet Union. Out of that, so this is inventory. Out of that, in the last 12 months, there were 3.5 million sold. So basically, your inventory unsold is about 3.3 years worth. So essentially, construction industry in Russia is, if not dead, but it's just going to go belly up within the next 3 to 6 months, and that's going to be a huge blow to Russian budget, to Russian employment situation, to Russian GDP, because construction industry generates a lot of sort of jobs, a lot of GDP activity, and so on. So this is going to be a huge destabilizing factor for Russian political situation going forward. Not right now, but the thing is definitely going in sort of wrong direction, let's put it this way. And sometimes in the fall, it will be much more visible. But as I said before, the Russian economy anyways is, it's how to say, invisible implosion for the outsiders, but it's imploding and imploding pretty badly. The only sort of thing that may revive is a huge increase in the prices for crude oil. If it goes to, let's say, 80 for Russian export, or even 90, that's obviously will sort of, how to say, paper over all of this internal economic problems in Russia. Another news from Russia, they have all of this passenger airplanes made by Airbus and Boeing, and they cannot service them. They're starting to getting into the situation where more and more technical problems. They need service. There are more shutdowns of these airplanes that flies to Russia due to technical problems. So Russia sort of found solution. We'll find out if it works. So Iran is now going to be servicing Russian operated Airbus and probably Boeing airplanes. Don't know much about the capability of Iran, but apparently they developed something because they were under sanctions, so they had to survive as well. And so now they sort of extending their service to Russia. So Russia is going to be servicing their fleet of West-made airplanes in Iran. Then couple more pieces of news in the U.S. U.S. Can resume drawing on strategic petroleum reserve. It went down again to 369.6 million barrels. So that's again a new draw, and what this also means that the prices for crude oil are artificially suppressed. And as I said before, this eventually this ability to pump this crude from SPR is getting towards the end of it, and then there will be sharp spike, and that will probably reignite inflation in the West in general, not just in US but in the West, because today there were inflation numbers from the US, which optically looks like inflation situation is improving there. I think headline was like 5%, but if you look at the core, which excludes all of this energy stuff, I think it was like 5.6, which means it's not sort of going away. And the only reason it was 5 because the price for crude went down. So if it goes back up, the number is gonna start to look very ugly very quickly again, and that's where most likely everything is headed. So for that reason, again, the Federal Reserve in the US is in a very difficult situation where they really cannot reduce interest rate, this Federal Reserve, because it will just reignite huge inflation, which can literally will jump over 10%, which will be will lead to social unrest in the US, because if you look over past couple years, the real wages in the US were declining, and so which also means that the people at the sort of lower end, they are essentially at this point really in a survival mode. And if you continue, if you have another strong push in terms of losing even more in real terms, they may be able in a position where they have, literally have, don't have enough to, let's say, whatever they do, like, pay rent or pay their mortgages or whatever. So things may start to fall apart really easily, as I said. And so, but on the other hand, if this interest rates stay where they are or even gonna get hiked, this will eventually destroy the banking system. So there is no good choices, let's put this way, at this point. And the situation is very similar everywhere. The continental Europe probably is in even worse shape in this regard, because there were like in US never had negative interest rates, versus like Germany. I think France had them, Germany in particular had them, and that really means that the economic damage is even much worse than in the US, because the more sort of distorted the picture interest rates are, the more deeper damage they do, the more sort of basically it's essentially you going into socialism or communism when interest rates are close to zero or even negative, right? So that's effectively what it is, and that's obviously destroys society from all angles. There's also interesting piece of information on Ukrainian refugees. I mentioned before, I think there's like around like 8 million refugees from Ukraine. What is I think little known is that close to 3 million actually went to Russia, by the way. So around 5 million and a change went to the West. So as you can see, there's a significant sort of pro-Russian portion of population in Ukraine, and in a way war sort of separates and creates more more coherent society. It's done in a very sort of bad way, but that's just what the war actually does to society. So the people who went to the West, so there were Poles among them, how many of them planning to return to Ukraine. Only roughly, let's say 55% planning to return. So essentially half of the people don't plan to return ever back to Ukraine. They want to settle in the West. So as you can imagine, it's a huge number. And if the war is over, there's even actually more sort of bad to this than just what I said, is because here is saying this is mostly women with children, essentially. And let's say when the war is over, the man will go and will try to reunite with the rest of the family in the West. So the flow is going to be, more than this, half of this refugees. Is going to be much larger number. To know what it is, but it's what's going to happen in Ukraine. It's going to be very very difficult demographic situation. I would say terrible demographic situation. It doesn't mean it's sort of there's no solution. There's always solution for that, and the solution is really economic freedom and obviously political freedom, which at this point Ukraine has essentially it's economic desert. It's economic concentration camp, and so that's really the answer. If the society is going to be willing to do that, that's another question. But there's always solution, and meaning like there's a positive solution, not just some kind of like negative cruelty or so or something like that. So that was the last update on this sort of general strategic news, and now let's switch back to Ukraine. Oops, sorry for this. One update is actually Ukraine started exporting electricity to Poland and I believe to Moldova and Romania, which is kind of amazing given what's been going on during the winter and fall. But what's really happening is that at this point, why this is possible is because Ukrainian industry is dead. And so because there is no demand for electricity, and the largest consumer of electricity is not residential consumers, but industry. This is for those who are just saying that, they can save electricity, but not using the lamps or turning off anything. The real, where the real sort of meat is really industry and infrastructure. Meaning like city infrastructure and so on. This is where like largest consumers, not ordinary people. They really small fraction of the consumption in most of the countries. So essentially, so the answer is, going back to the answer, is that since industry is essentially dead, they don't consume anything. What Ukraine has in terms of installed capacity, specifically nuclear power plants, it's more than enough to cover the need of their sort of ordinary citizens, and so then Ukrainian government tries to export because the prices for electricity are much higher in Europe, so there is a high margin there. I can guarantee you there's also corruption in Ukrainian government and people basically lining their pockets from this export, but just because all of the energy generation and distribution is controlled by the government, so essentially it's all there's tons of corruption there because of that. So, but that's what's really why this is sort of possible, why this is happening at the moment. Now let's actually walk through the front line. We're going to do it in a clockwise fashion, as I always do. So the situation along the state border more or less the same, meaning sort of fairly medium level of intensity. Definitely not quiet, but not at the highest sort of level of tension. Sometimes it happens how it used to be. Let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are essentially quiet, and I mentioned this before. This is becoming more like a Zaporizhya front line, which is And it's actually, if you're really saying, this is probably going to be least strategic section of the front overall, because it doesn't lead to any large strategic sort of solution. If you really think here, you know, attacking for Ukraine in this direction is, there are many problems here, first of all, because if you attack straight here in the sort of eastern or southeastern direction, you expose your flank from attack from the Russian side, from Russia. And so, and in even order to achieve anything, you really need to cross, you know, these two rivers, then also larger river here to actually really create problem for the Russian side, and you need to really cover a lot of space. So essentially, this is the least, let's see, the direction that offers least opportunity for Ukraine, and something similar for Russia, right? You just, let's say if you attack here, you're again stuck in this area around the Siversky Donetsk river, and so you hitting and you're not achieving really anything. So the front line here is kind of like naturally becoming quiet and less important. Let's now jump to the North Donbass front line. So here things sort of now more become official. What I said before, Wagner mercenaries, they really shrunk to very small area. Officially, this was announced by them. So the flanks are now covered by some unknown airborne units. I don't know which divisions are those. Probably if you look here, it's probably 7th Airborne Division back on the front line. You know, 98, 106. You know, also brigades, like those units. They back on the front line here on the northern flank here. And essentially, Wagner mercenaries, they're not even attempting to sort of push here along this road, as you can see, that goes to Slavyansk. They even abandoned this one. They really narrowly focus around Bahmut at this point. And they really kind of like bogged down. There are reports that they are close to gaining control over the railroad station, but there's still, you know, this western part of the town, and the ability to squeeze Ukrainian troops from there is, I'd say, more and more questionable. Or the entire of the sort of Wagner mercenaries body will be expanded essentially in attempting to do this, to show the propaganda, you know, to show results for propaganda purposes, because essentially they want to say, okay, we achieved this, we captured Soledar by ourselves, and we captured Bahmut, and so on. But at this point, as I said, it's a theoretic victory for the Wagner mercenaries, and essentially leads to no, strategically, it's, I would say, it's not really defeat, but it's definitely not a success, because they obviously also managed to consume a lot of Ukrainian troops here. So from that perspective, they have some achievement, but from a strategic perspective, there's not much. So this is where they are concentrated, as you can see. Not even this sort of flank here around Ivanivsky, they don't even sort of, they pulled from there, really just narrowly Bahmut, and pretty much in this, the most northern sort of flank here, and that's it. That's because, as I said, they exhausted, there's not enough resources, so they just, this is all that they can do at this point. And just for the reference, this is also where they were operating. Now there are some airborne units here as well that are unknown. So at this point, more or less, the front line here is probably going to stabilize, not going to move much. This might be the most where the line of their furthest Russian advance at this point, because for all intents and purposes, Wagner mercenaries, the way they were, they done. They out of the picture at this point. What's going to happen, we'll see, we'll find out, but there is not much left from them. They were, let's put this way, they were expanded in all of these efforts. Now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things here are also getting somewhat quieter. There are some attacks in Marinka, which happen every day. A little bit in Novomikhailivka, but even this northern part got a little bit quiet. So what's happening, as I said before, Russian side is really accumulating shells to be able to respond in force to the future Ukrainian offensive. And because they don't know when it's going to happen, may happen in 2 weeks, may happen in a week, may happen in 2 months or 3 months. Because there is this uncertainty, they have no choice but to accumulate resources, because, as I said before, they don't produce enough shells, and at this point China is not willing to provide the shells, artillery shells, to Russia. Probably something similar is happening with North Korea and with Iran. So effectively, at this point, Russia on its own, and as I said before, they destroyed the production facility that was capable of really producing a humongous amount of artillery shells, but at this point it's gone. You cannot sort of resurrect it, and so they have several plants, but they are no better, actually, like smaller than the Western ones. So, and as we all know, inventory is essentially depleted. So this is where the Russian military stands at this point. Actually, just realized I forgot to mention that the Russian parliament passed new draft law, and this law essentially would what this law means is that Russia prepares and will continue the war. The Russian political top is not giving up and has full resolve to continue the war. And the reason I'm saying this is because the law is very, I would say, tight, like very, effectively forces everyone to, anyone can be drafted. So you have special electronic account with the Russian military service, and even if you don't go there and you receive letters to that email, essentially to that electronic account, even if you don't check it, you sort of already legally liable. And if you don't sort of think, you have 7 days to respond to it, and then 20 days to show up to this collection point. If you don't, then you're gonna be sort of deprived of all of your economic rights. You cannot start the company, you cannot drive the car, you cannot, do any sort of normal life. You cannot do you cannot do literally anything. And since the moment they issue this letter to you electronically, which up to you to monitor, it's your problem if you don't monitor it, you're not allowed to leave Russia, to leave outside of Russia. So that's pretty comprehensive law. And the other important part of it is all of the Russian, governmental agencies will be providing information to this Ministry of Defense, which runs this system now, this new system. So they will provide all information in you since you are sort of born. So the government or Ministry of Defense will know literally everything about you, where you are. So it's similar to 1984, Big Brother is watching you. And effectively, you cannot escape this from being called into the army, essentially, because otherwise you're going to be economically sort of destroyed. They stopped short of implementing criminal sort of let's say, sort of prison terms, but it's probably gonna come a little bit later, because even this this law is not welcomed by the Russian society. It's quite a bit of a shocker, because Russian top just was literally several days before this law was passed, was saying literally this kind of law will never be passed. And a few days later they did 180-degree turnaround and said, well, here it is. So this is I guess not a surprise for the most Russians, but at the same time many of them support what's going on, and so they will have chance to, I would say, prove that support on the battlefield with their own lives. Now let's finish with the this is situation around Avdiivka. Nothing new there, and then the Zaporizhya front line situation here is also quiet. At the same time, this is the area where there's probably going to be, both sides will seek strategic results in this war. Obviously, Ukrainian side is more announcing that they're going to be, on offensive at some point, not unclear when, which is by itself is very backwards way of doing things, but it is what it is in the Ukrainian side. At the same time, this is the only way where Ukraine can make really big advances, but because Russian side knows where Ukraine is going to be attacking, so they already built like a third defensive line there. They mining everything, they laying mines everywhere there. So by the time Ukraine launches that offensive, I'm afraid it's going to be nearly impossible to achieve anything there, because it's going to be so heavily fortified and mined that you really need extraordinary amount of resources to overcome resistance there. And at the same time, this central and northern Donbass front line are already in this similar situation, where again you need a lot of resources to breach there. So we'll see what happens with this highly expected offensive, but it may not work out because of what I just explained, that Russian side was giving a lot of time to prepare, and we'll see what happens there. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and till next time, bye bye.